I bought this land because I wanted peace. 47 acres of Texas scrubland. Far enough from town that you couldn't see another house from my porch. Close enough to civilization that I could still get decent internet access. The deed was clean. The property lines were surveyed and marked. And most importantly, I wasn't part of any homeowners association. That last part mattered to me more than anything else. My name is Marcus Webb, and I'm about to tell you about the day a woman named Patricia Bellman tried to turn my private ranch into her personal kingdom. She brought 8 people, fake paperwork, and enough arrogance to fill a courtroom. What she didn't count on was that in Texas, we take property rights seriously. Very seriously. She thought she could intimidate me off my own land. I thought her clipboard and her title meant more than my deed. She was wrong. Dead wrong. And before this was over, I'd watch her HOA crumble into nothing but a cautionary tale about what happens when you cross the wrong property line. It started on a Thursday morning in late September. I was out by the barn, checking on some fencing I'd been repairing, when I heard the sound of an engine coming up my access road. Not unusual sometimes, deliveries got lost out here. What was unusual was the sound that came next, the screech of metal being forced open, followed by the distinct crash of my front gate slamming against its hinges. I dropped my tools and walked toward the sound. My property sits at the end of a private road, marked with 3 separate signs that say private property and no trespassing. The gate itself is a solid steel frame, painted white, with a chain and padlock. It was closed that morning. It's always closed unless I'm expecting someone. By the time I got within view of the entrance, I could see a white SUV sitting just inside my property line. The gate was hanging open. One hinge bent where someone had forced it. Standing next to the SUV was a woman in her mid-50s. Blonde hair pulled back tight, wearing what looked like business casual clothes that were completely wrong for ranch country. She was holding a clipboard and talking on her phone. Behind her were 3 more people, 2 men and another woman, all dressed similarly, all carrying clipboards or tablets. They were walking around my property like they owned it, taking pictures, making notes. I walked up to the woman who was clearly in charge. "Can I help you?" I said, keeping my voice level. "This is private property." She looked at me like I was a mild inconvenience. "We're conducting an inspection," she said, not even bothering to introduce herself. "This area falls under our jurisdiction for visual compliance review." "Your jurisdiction," I repeated. "Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you're trespassing. I'm going to need you and your people to leave. Now," she smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile people give you when they think they've already won. "I'm Patricia Bellman, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. And according to our records, this property falls within our extended oversight zone for aesthetic compliance." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "Oversight zone, lady. I'm not part of your HOA. Never have been. Never will be. My property is 4 miles from your nearest house. Now I'm asking you nicely, get off my land." Patricia's smile didn't waver. She pulled a piece of paper from her clipboard and held it up. "This is a certified boundary extension filed with the county. Your property, while not technically within our residential zone, does fall under our visual influence buffer. That means any structures, vehicles, or landscaping visible from our community are subject to review. Visual influence buffer." I said slowly, "That's not a real thing." "It most certainly is," she said. "And right now, you're in violation of several codes. That barn she pointed to, my 100-year-old barn, is an eyesore. Your fencing is non-compliant. and you have multiple vehicles in various states of disrepair visible from the county road. The vehicles she was referring to were 2 old trucks I was restoring and a tractor that was perfectly functional but admittedly rusty. They were on my property, hundreds of yards from the road, barely visible even if you knew where to look. "Ma'am," I said, and I could feel my jaw getting tight. "I'm telling you one last time. Get off my property. You have no authority here." She turned to the 3 people with her. "Proceed with the documentation," she said, like I hadn't spoken at all. That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. They were trying to establish some kind of precedent, some kind of claim over my land by acting like they had authority and hoping I wouldn't push back hard enough. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Patricia watched me do it, still smiling. "Zavala County Sheriff." The dispatcher said, "This is Marcus Webb, out on County Road, 1420. I've got 4 people who forced their way through my locked gate and are refusing to leave my property. I need a deputy out here." The dispatcher took my information and said someone would be there within 20 minutes. I hung up and looked at Patricia. "You've got 20 minutes to leave before you're explaining this to a sheriff's deputy." "Oh, we'll wait," she said pleasantly. "I'm sure once the deputy sees our documentation, everything will be cleared up." Her people kept walking around, taking pictures. One of them, a big guy in a polo shirt with HOA enforcement embroidered on it, started walking toward my house. Not the barn. Not the outbuildings, but my actual house, where I lived. "Stop right there," I called out. He kept walking. I moved to intercept him. I said, "Stop." He turned to look at me, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was bigger than me, probably 6'3", 220, and he was used to people backing down. "I'm just documenting violations," he said. "You're about 3 seconds away from being physically removed from my property." I said, "Back up." Patricia's voice cut through. "Jeffrey, come back here. We'll document the residential structure from the perimeter." The big guy Jeffrey stared at me for a moment longer, then backed off. But the message was clear, they weren't taking me seriously. The deputy who arrived was a man I'd seen around town a few times, Bill Myers. According to his name tag, he was in his late 40s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from years of outdoor work. He took in the scene, the broken gate, the SUV, the 4 people with clipboards, and me standing there with my arms crossed. "Afternoon. Marcus," he said. "Want to tell me what's going on?" I explained the situation, the forced entry, the claims about HOA jurisdiction, the refusal to leave. Patricia jumped in before I finished, waving her paperwork. "Deputy, this is all a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "We're simply exercising our legal rights under the county's aesthetic compliance code. This property falls within our buffer zone. And we have documentation, ma'am." Deputy Myers cut her off. Not rudely, but firmly. "Do you have permission to be on this property? We have legal authorization under." "That's not what I asked." "Did Mr. Webb give you permission to enter his property?" Patricia's smile finally slipped a little. "We don't need his permission. We have county authorization." Deputy Myers turned to me. "Is your property part of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA?" "No, sir. Never has been." He nodded and turned back to Patricia. "Then you're trespassing. You need to leave now. And that gate you broke, that's criminal mischief. Mr. Webb would be within his rights to press charges." "This is ridiculous," Patricia said, but there was an edge in her voice now. "We have documentation. You can show me that documentation from the other side of the property line." Deputy Myers said, "Let's go." I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. Patricia and her group left, though she made a point of handing me a piece of paper that said Notice of Non-Compliance with a list of supposed violations and a deadline of 30 days to remedy the issues. Deputy Myers took a report about the gate, took pictures of the damage, and told me to call if they came back. People like that usually back down once law enforcement gets involved. He said, but just in case, you might want to get some cameras up. I already had cameras, motion-activated trail cameras I used for wildlife, mounted on trees near the property line. But Deputy Myers had a point. I spent the rest of that day installing 3 proper security cameras, one covering the gate, one covering the front approach to the house, and one covering the barn area. All of them recorded continuously to a network drive, with timestamps and date stamps. 2 days later, they came back. This time, it was a Saturday. Around 10 in the morning, I was in the house having coffee when I got a motion alert on my phone from the gate camera. I pulled up the feed and watched as the same white SUV from before pulled up to my gate. This time they didn't break it, they just opened it and drove through. I'd replaced the lock after the first incident, but apparently they'd brought bolt cutters. I grabbed my phone and headed outside. By the time I got to the front porch, there were 3 vehicles in my driveway: the white SUV, a red pickup truck, and a silver sedan. 8 people this time, including Patricia. They were spreading out across my property like they were conducting a survey. You're trespassing. I called out from the porch. All of you. Leave now or I'm calling the sheriff again. Patricia turned to look at me. She'd brought more people, more clipboards, and apparently more confidence. Mr. Webb, we've tried to resolve this amicably. Your continued obstruction of our legitimate oversight is forcing us to take more assertive action. Assertive action. I repeated. You mean trespassing with more people? We're documenting violations for our official report to the county. She said, you can cooperate. Or you can explain to a judge why you're interfering with legal code enforcement. I pulled out my phone and called 911 again. Same dispatcher. Same request for a deputy. But this time, Patricia didn't look concerned. In fact, she walked closer to the house, right up to the edge of my porch. You know what I think she said? And her voice had changed, less professional, more personal. I think you moved out here because you wanted to avoid rules. You wanted to do whatever you want. Store your junk wherever you want. And not care about how it affects everyone else. Everyone else is 4 miles away. I said, property values don't work that way. She said, your eyesore of a property brings down values for the entire area. And I'm not going to let one stubborn man undermine everything we've built. Behind her, I could see her people getting bolder. 2 of them were now walking around the side of my house, peering in windows. Jeffrey, the big enforcer guy, was filming everything with his phone, narrating like he was making a documentary. That's far enough, I said. Louder now. Everyone needs to back up from my house. Or what Patricia said. She actually said that, or what? Mr. Webb, you going to make us leave? You going to push a 56-year-old woman down your porch steps? Go ahead. Jeffrey's recording everything. I'm not a violent person. Never have been. I've been in maybe 2 fights in my entire life. Both in high school, but I grew up in Texas. And I grew up around guns. My dad taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. Safety first. Respect. Always. And never pull a weapon unless you're prepared to use it. I had a shotgun inside. A Remington 870. Loaded with buckshot. Sitting in the corner of my living room by the front door. I'd put it there after the first incident. Just in case. I went inside. picked up the shotgun, and came back to the porch. I didn't point it at anyone. I kept it low ready, angled down and to the side, and I didn't touch the safety. But I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to understand that this wasn't a game. The effect was immediate. The two people by my windows backed up fast. Jeffrey stopped filming and put his phone down. Even Patricia took a step back. This is a private residence on private property. I said, keeping my voice steady, "You are trespassing. You were asked to leave. You refused. Under Texas Penal Code Section 9.41, I have the legal right to use force, including deadly force, to protect my property and my home from unlawful entry. I am not pointing this weapon at anyone. I am not threatening anyone. But I am informing you that if you do not leave immediately, I will consider any further advance toward my home as a direct threat. And I will respond accordingly." For about 5 seconds, nobody moved. Then Patricia found her voice. "You're threatening us with a gun," she said. But the confidence was gone. "You just threatened us with a gun. That's assault. That's self-defense." I said, "And it's all being recorded. Now, get off my property. We're leaving." One of the other people said, a woman in her 30s who looked genuinely scared, "Patricia, we need to go." But Patricia wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and started filming me. "Everyone, stay calm. I want this on record. This man is threatening us with a deadly weapon. We are peacefully conducting authorized inspections, and he's responding with violence." I racked the shotgun. That sound, the chunk of a shell chambering, is one of the most recognizable sounds in the world. And it cuts through bullshit like nothing else. "Leave." I said one more time. They left. All of them. Quickly. Piling into their vehicles and driving out through my gate. I watched them go, then set the shotgun down carefully and sat on my porch steps. My hands were shaking. Deputy Myers arrived about 15 minutes later. This time he brought a sergeant with him, a woman named Rodriguez. They took my statement, watched the camera footage from all 3 cameras, and examined the cut lock on my gate. "You handled that correctly," Rodriguez said after reviewing everything. "You didn't point the weapon at anyone. You gave multiple warnings. And you only displayed force after they refused to leave and began approaching your home. Under Texas law, that's justified. They're going to say, 'I threatened them.'" I said, "Let them." Rodriguez said, "We've got it all on video. You want to press charges for trespass and criminal mischief. I did. I filed formal charges that day. I also called a lawyer, a woman named Diane Foster, who specialized in property law. She listened to my story, watched the videos, and started making notes. This is going to get worse before it gets better," she said. "People like Patricia Bellman don't give up easily. She's going to double down. She'll probably try to sue you, claim you assaulted her, maybe even get some of her HOA members to file complaints. We need to be ready." She was right. 3 days later, I got served with papers. Patricia Bellman and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA were suing me for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interfering with their lawful code enforcement duties. They were asking for $50,000 in damages and a court order requiring me to comply with their aesthetic guidelines. Diane filed a countersuit the next day: trespass, criminal mischief, harassment, and intentional interference with property rights. We also requested a restraining order to keep Patricia and her HOA enforcement team away from my property. The restraining order hearing happened 2 weeks later. Both sides had to present their case to a judge. Patricia showed up with 2 lawyers and 4 witnesses, all HOA members, who swore they'd been present during the incident and that I'd threatened them with a gun without provocation. Then Diane played the videos. All 3 cameras. Synchronized timelines. Showing everything: the forced entry through the gate, the refusal to leave after multiple warnings, the people approaching my house and looking in windows, and finally, me coming out with the shotgun, never pointing it, never threatening, just displaying it while clearly stating the legal basis for doing so. The judge watched in silence. Then he asked Patricia's lawyer, "Is your client seriously arguing that she had legal authority to enter this property, Your Honor?" The HOA has a documented buffer zone. There's no such thing as a buffer zone that grants trespassing rights. The judge said, "Did you advise your client of this?" The lawyer hesitated. "We believed the county code. Show me the county code that supports this buffer zone claim." They couldn't, because it didn't exist. What Patricia had filed with the county wasn't a legal extension of HOA authority. It was just a map she'd submitted showing areas she considered visually connected to her HOA community. It had no legal weight whatsoever. The judge granted my restraining order. Patricia and anyone acting on behalf of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA were prohibited from coming within 500 feet of my property. He also strongly suggested that Patricia's lawyers review the videos carefully before proceeding with their lawsuit. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong again. The lawsuit moved forward, but slowly. Discovery happened, both sides requesting documents. Depositions. Interrogatories. Diane subpoenaed all the HOA's records, including emails, meeting minutes, and financial documents. What she found was damning. The buffer zone thing wasn't just Patricia's personal crusade. It was part of a larger strategy the HOA had been using for years. They'd target properties near their community, claim some kind of jurisdiction, and pressure the owners to either join the HOA or sell their land. If the owners pushed back, the HOA would make their lives difficult, showing up repeatedly, filing complaints with the county, even vandalizing property and blaming it on code violations. They'd done it to at least 4 other property owners in the area. 2 had given up and sold. 1 had joined the HOA to make the harassment stop. The 4th was still fighting. And Diane reached out to him. His name was Tom Pacheco, and he'd been dealing with the same thing for 3 years. We joined forces. Diane filed an amended complaint adding Tom as a co-plaintiff and expanding the case to include RICO violations, essentially arguing that the HOA was operating as a criminal enterprise. It was a bold move, but the evidence supported it. The HOA's lawyers tried to get the case dismissed. They failed. They tried to move it to arbitration. They failed. Finally, they agreed to a deposition of Patricia under oath. Diane handled it personally. I sat in the conference room with Tom and watched as Patricia was sworn in. She looked confident at first, dressed immaculately, every hair in place. Mrs. Bellman. Diane started. "Let's begin with the buffer zone. Can you explain the legal basis for this concept?" Patricia launched into the same explanation she'd given me: visual influence, aesthetic compliance, county authorization. Diane let her talk. "And you filed documentation with the county establishing this buffer zone." "Yes." "Can you show me the county ordinance that authorized you to do so?" Patricia hesitated. "It's not an ordinance exactly. It's more of an administrative filing. So there's no ordinance that grants your HOA jurisdiction over properties outside your community. The county accepted our filing. Accepting a document and granting legal authority are 2 different things." "Wouldn't you agree?" Patricia's lawyer interrupted. "Where are you going with this?" "I'm establishing that my client's property is not and has never been subject to your client's HOA authority. Let's move on." Mrs. Bellman, when you entered Mr. Webb's property on September 23rd, did you have his permission? We had legal authorization. That's not what I asked. Did Marcus Webb give you permission to enter his property? No. And when he asked you to leave, did you leave? We had work to complete. So you refused to leave, even after being told you were trespassing. We weren't trespassing. We had legal authority. Diane pulled out a document. This is the Texas Penal Code definition of trespassing. It states that a person commits trespass if they enter or remain on property without effective consent and receive notice to depart but fail to do so. Do you dispute that you remained on the property after being told to leave? I dispute that we needed his consent. Based on what legal authority? Patricia looked at her lawyer. He leaned in and whispered something to her. She straightened up. Based on our buffer zone documentation, which has no legal force, as we've established. Let's talk about your second visit. On September 25th, you brought 8 people this time. Why? We needed more documentation. Or you were trying to intimidate Mr. Webb. Absolutely not. You approached his home. You looked in his windows. Your enforcement officer filmed him while narrating accusations. That's not intimidating. We were documenting violations. By looking in someone's windows on private property without permission, Patricia's composure was cracking. He pulled a gun on us. He displayed a firearm on his own property after multiple people refused to leave despite being told they were trespassing. Were you aware that under Texas law, property owners have the right to use force, including deadly force, to protect their property and home? He threatened us. Did he point the gun at anyone? Silence. Mrs. Bellman. Did Marcus Webb point the gun at anyone? No. But did he verbally threaten to shoot anyone? He said he would use deadly force. He said he had the legal right to use force if necessary and asked you to leave. That's not a threat, that's a statement of law. Did he make any threatening gestures? Patricia didn't answer. Let me rephrase. At any point did Marcus Webb do anything other than display a firearm while repeatedly asking you to leave his property? He racked the shotgun. After you'd been told to leave multiple times, and after some of your group had approached his home and looked in his windows? Is that correct? Patricia's face was flushed. Now, I want to take a break. We'll take a break, Diane said. But when we come back, I want to talk about the emails. During the break, Tom leaned over to me. She's falling apart, he said quietly. What emails? I asked Diane. You'll see, she said. When the deposition resumed, Diane pulled out a stack of printed emails. Mrs. Bellman. Do you recognize these? Patricia glanced at them. I'd need to review. These are emails from your HOA account to board members and your enforcement team. Let me read one. This is from you. Dated September 21st. 2 days before your first visit to Mr. Webb's property. Quote, we need to establish presence on the Webb property before he realizes what we're doing. Once we've documented violations and filed our report, it will be difficult for him to challenge our authority without looking like he's hiding something. End quote. What did you mean by that? I meant we needed to complete our inspection. You wrote, before he realizes what we're doing. What were you doing conducting an inspection? Here's another one. Dated September 26th, the day after the shotgun incident. Quote, the Webb situation is escalating, but we can use this to our advantage. His aggressive response proves he's unstable and dangerous. We need to document everything and get local media involved. A dangerous gun owner refusing reasonable oversight. That's a story that will put pressure on the county to support our position. Did you write this? Patricia looked at her lawyer. He looked pale. Mrs. Bellman. Did you write this email? I may have been upset after being threatened. You wrote an email strategizing about how to use Mr. Webb's lawful self-defense to manipulate public opinion and pressure county officials. Is that accurate? I was, yes or no? Please. I was trying to protect our community. By lying about what happened, by attempting to portray Mr. Webb as dangerous when your own people's testimony and the video evidence show he acted lawfully and with restraint. The deposition went on for another 2 hours. By the end, Patricia had contradicted herself multiple times, admitted to coordinating the pressure campaign against multiple property owners, and confirmed that she'd never had any actual legal authority to enter my property. Her lawyers knew they were in trouble. 2 weeks later, they made a settlement offer. The HOA would drop all claims against me, pay for all my legal fees and damages to my property, issue a formal apology, and agree to never enter or attempt to claim jurisdiction over my property again. In exchange, I would drop the RICO charges and agree not to pursue criminal charges against Patricia personally. Diane advised me to reject it. We have her on perjury. She said she lied under oath during that deposition. If we report it to the district attorney, she could face criminal charges. And the RICO case is solid. We could dismantle the entire HOA. Tom wanted to push forward. He'd been dealing with this for years and wanted to see Patricia punished. I understood that, but I was tired. I'd bought that land to have peace. And all of this was the opposite of peace. What if we take the settlement but report the perjury anyway? I asked. Diane smiled. I like how you think. We took the settlement. The HOA paid me $47,000 for damages, legal fees, and compensation for harassment. They issued a public apology. Patricia resigned as HOA president. Then, Diane sent everything, the deposition transcript, the emails, the videos to the district attorney's office with a cover letter explaining the multiple instances of perjury and the evidence of organized harassment. The DA opened an investigation. 3 months later, Patricia was indicted on 6 counts of perjury and 2 counts of criminal conspiracy. The HOA itself was audited, and the state found years of financial irregularities, misused dues, unreported income, and payments to board members that violated state law. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA was dissolved by court order. The remaining board members were sued by their own residents for mismanagement. Patricia took a plea deal, no jail time, but 5 years probation, community service, and a permanent record. Tom got a similar settlement for his case. 3 other property owners who'd been harassed by the HOA also came forward and received compensation. As for me, I fixed my gate. I kept the cameras running, and I put up a new sign at my property entrance. It's a big metal sign, professionally made, that reads, "Private property, armed owner, trained, not part of any HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted to the full extent of Texas law." I've had exactly 0 problems since then. The whole experience taught me something important. Boundaries only work if you're willing to enforce them. Patricia believed she could bully me because she'd bullied other people successfully. She thought having more people, more confidence, and more willingness to lie would be enough. What she didn't understand is that in Texas, property rights aren't just tradition, they're law. And the law doesn't care about your clipboard or your title or how many people you bring with you. It cares about who owns the land and who has permission to be on it. I never wanted to be the guy who had to pull a gun on trespassers. But I'm glad I knew my rights, and I'm glad I stood my ground. Because if I hadn't, Patricia would have kept pushing until she'd effectively stolen my land through intimidation and manufactured authority. Sometimes peace comes from being willing to fight for it. And sometimes the best way to keep a gate closed is to make sure everyone knows you mean it. That's my land. That's my home. And that's where the story ends, with the gate locked. The cameras recording. And me sitting on my porch with a clear conscience and the deed to 47 acres of Texas that no HOA president can ever touch again.